We're coming to you live from Johannesburg. You're watching Tonight with Jane Dutton. Lerato Singadi is Double HP's widow, but she couldn't stop the funeral planned for her dead husband tomorrow from going ahead. So what informed her court application? We'll ask the National House of Traditional Leaders later what it's like to be creating new sound and vision in South African art. We'll speak to two Standard Bank Young Artists of the Year awardees. This is for 2019. Trumpeter Mandla Mlangeni and playwright Amy Jefter. You can call in with your questions on 011-759-6340. You can also tweet us on hashtag Tonight with Jane Dutton. But before we get to all of that in the show, Gareth is standing by and he's got the latest news headlines for us tonight. Gareth, what do you have for us?
Hello, Cathy. I was actually going to say I'm going to get ready for News Hour a bit later, but after that intro, I'm going to go actually offset and watch your show tonight with Jane Dutton. Now, here's some of the big stories we're following for you this evening here on ENCA. Double HP's funeral, as you just heard, is going to go ahead tomorrow after his customary widow tried unsuccessfully in court to interdict it from continuing. Johannesburg's High Court has ruled that Jabulani Tambo and Lerato Singadi were married under customary law, but the judge said the family's funeral tomorrow in Mahikeng must still go ahead. Singadi wanted to arrange a funeral for the musician in Johannesburg. Now, to remind you, the artist died last week.
I have to say I am partially pleased with the outcome. This gives me then the opportunity to do exactly what it is that I wanted to do for my husband, Jabulani Tambo, which is give him the burial and everything that he wanted, everything that was his last wishes. So I have been granted that, and despite the funeral going ahead tomorrow, I will still do what he requested, what he would expect from me, and what it is that he wanted.
Well, you can expect full coverage of that funeral on enca.com, also here on ENCA. Now, the ANC appears to be split over the controversial e-tolls. Let's remind you how this happened. Gauteng Premier David Makhura led a march by the ANC and its alliance partners in Pretoria today against the e-tolling system. They were joined by civil society groups, but government recently making it very clear the system is here to stay and has been urging motorists, in fact, to pay their outstanding bills.
The ANC and this government are a very listening organization. We have heard you. It's not for me to respond now because this is directed to the president.
And we'll wait to hear what the president says about that. Now, government is going to war against gangs, they tell us. President Cyril Ramaphosa today launching what they're calling a specialized unit to tackle gangsterism in Hanover Park. That's down in Western Cape. The unit's already had success in other areas, and he now says a national plan has also been put into place. The unit was reintroduced in response to massive community protests back in September.
We are going to pursue you. We are going to chase you down. We are going to find you in every little corner where you are hiding. And we are going to take our lives back.
Well, are you ready for the best hour and a half on a Friday night on television? Well, here's Cathy with Tonight Show.
Well, don't set the bar so high, Gareth.
It's all yours now. There we go. You have that.
Thanks for that. And, of course, Gareth is up later with News Hour. That's coming up at 10 o'clock. Double HP's widow, Lerato Singadi's bitter spat with his family seems to have come to an end, at least by virtue of the court process that we've been witnessing. The courts declaring Singadi his lawful wife, even though the hip-hop artist's family refuses to recognize her. Tonight, we take a look at how customary laws are interpreted by the current laws of the country. Now, joining me from the National House of Traditional Leaders is Inkosikazi, Nondumiso, Nobhongo, Ngonyama, and Kgosatsana, Gaboilelwe, Moroka-Motshabi. Thank you so much, ladies, for your time tonight. I think before we get into, the specifics of this case, there's been, of course, massive debate. Public debate, especially on social media, on this particular story. When it comes to this matter actually ending up in the courts, was there any other, or are there any other available mechanisms, at least through the traditional framework, that could have been exhausted? Or was the court the only arbiter that would have been reliable in this case? Let me begin with you.
Good evening to the viewers at home. Thank you for the opportunity of responding to these questions that talk direct to the issues of women. Coming to this case and the challenge that is being faced by women, especially those who are married customarily, it gives us an opportunity to really respond. And in responding, we can say that there are indeed mechanisms customarily to address issues of this nature. Be that as it may, because we are in a democratic South Africa where we uphold the Constitution as the supreme law of the country, when there is no way that people seem not to reach an agreement, or they cannot reach an amicable solution to their problems, we always resort to courts. And in this instance, because we could see, or because we could see and it appeared that there was no way that the matter could be resolved amicably, customarily, then they relied to the courts.
But what are those mechanisms customarily, Gaboilelwe, that could have been explored? And I mean, I'm speaking here specifically looking at, those people who perhaps may not necessarily be in a position to afford lawyers to take a matter such as this to court. What would they be able to do in a situation like this, where there's dispute over their status as somebody's wife? What would they be able to do?
Thank you, Cathy. I think perhaps I need to take it back a little and say it's also a matter of choice. Because we live in a democratic society, as Nkosikazi Ngonyama says, if you choose to resolve your dispute through civic or civil in a civil way, then and not recognize the traditional way, it's still your choice, really. But as Africans, we have had a way of resolving our disputes.
But what I'm asking is, what is that way?
Yes, I'm coming to that.
Sure.
I'm coming to that.
Sure.
Firstly, if the family does not agree with each other, then you have your extended family that would come in to mediate. And if that doesn't work, then you go to your traditional leadership who have the power to mediate and solve cases in their areas. And this is why I started with the issue of the choice that you decide to take. I think a lot of us have sort of decided not to recognize our customary way of life, and most of the time resort to the modern way of doing things.
Of course, I think it also depends on location, because if you're from Soweto, I don't think that you're going to be able to identify where your traditional leader's house, if it's even there. And so when you have that dynamic that comes in, the courts, at least to an urban population, are they the only answer?
It depends, but in fact, if we are talking about the courts in urban areas being an answer, I would really say yes. But I would like to focus more on rural perspective, because we know, and it has been since time immemorial, the way of resolving. The reason why people choose to take the route of resolving their issues through traditional courts or a traditional setup way of resolving is because of the manner in which we do things. When you look at the courts, they practice what we would call a punitive, or the results of what is being done there in the courts. We take them as punitive way of doing things, or a punitive judgment. Whereas in traditional leadership institution, we talk of restorative justice. Coming to this case now, we know that there's a family, maybe let's say there are children involved. You cannot divorce the children from their grandparents. neither can you divorce the children from their mother. So it means that when we do things, we want still to build that relationship. Hence, we talk of restorative justice. That's why we encourage that in whatever dispute that is there, let us rather resolve it customarily. We've got a way of doing things rather than, because now if you look at this, you find that there's so much clash that you might find at a later stage that the family will be so scattered that they won't even be allowed, the children won't be allowed to go to their grandparents. They will be regarded as enemies. Whereas if it was resolved through this mediation of leadership institute, or customarily, we are opening a way of saying that no matter what is happening, we are still a family. We need each other.
All right.
That's what we practice.
Well, it's an interesting view, and I think in some situations it will be quite long and hard to get to that place where there's consensus and people actually sit around the table. But let's talk about the issue of legitimacy here. And it was one of the findings of the court today, where they spoke about how even though part of what had happened during the lobola process for Lerato Singadi was not necessarily down to the T according to what would have happened traditionally, it still did not mean that it was not recognized. And, so culture is also changing to, to involve convenience, whatever the case might be. So in terms of the fundamentals of then what underpins the legitimacy of that process, when is it recognized? And when can it not be recognized? Because if traditionally we used to say, oh no, the groom was there, so this thing wasn't really a proper lobola negotiation. Now it's like, well, it happens these days, but it doesn't delegitimize it. Are there ways of telling?
Yes, Cathy, we actually have an act that talks to customary marriages, and it's regulated. South Africa, we should also take into consideration that we have different cultures. We are a diverse nation. So what you recognize as Cathy, as being your way of doing things when it comes to customary marriage, might differ from the way I, Gaboilelwe, do it. But it does not necessarily mean that your way is above my way of doing things culturally. And in this case, in particular, I'd like to say we are very happy about the judgment of the judge did today, because he was fair in recognizing, as per law, that Lerato is the rightful or is the wife legally, customarily of double HP. So it does not really, to me, it says it depends on your culture as to how you actually do your.
But even that can be a point of contention, because when two people are getting married, you rightfully point out they bring, these different culture sets, and so where do we find consensus? Because on one hand, you may need to fulfill 10 things. On this other end, because the family is insisting that he wasn't done finished with lobola, so therefore it's not really legitimate. Whereas the court doesn't see it that way. South African law certainly doesn't see it that way.
We have to admit that as Africans, we practice what we call dual marriage, whereby there are two families meet and negotiate lobola. There is what I would call some scholars would call it a judicial notice, where you know that the sun rises from east to the west. It's not written down. We all know that. When it comes to lobola now, we all know as Africans, one thing for sure, that lobola is not finished. There are many reasons why lobola is not finished. And there's an agreement, there's a point where when families meet, they would say that, okay, fine, we need 10 head of cattle. Then the next question would say, how many cattle must I bring in order for this family to release the bride to me? Then the two parties would agree and say that, give us 5. Then immediately when that 5 has been brought in, the wife is released to the husband. Then the five remaining might be brought, might not be. But what is the key is that because of the fact that there are so many things, if like for instance, during the existence of marriage, I fight and I happen to, as the wife, I happen to go to my home, then when the husband fetches me, he has to pay. That's when now those five remaining would kick in a bit by bit. The fact that it was finished or not finished, the fact it's neither here nor there. When the parties agree that now we are handing this woman over to you, and in some instances, depending on culture.
But what about the family then that says, because a part of that affidavit said that they had never received her officially as his wife because they were not done paying the lobola. So what then does that do for the conversation? And of course, you know, part of the point might be moot because the court has already made a finding, but it's certainly a discussion that will need clarity in the lived out experiences of many for the legitimacy of the processes that they've either entered into or are entering into.
Cathy, the two families start with negotiations and they reach an agreement. As Ngonyama clearly stated, we all know that when you are in the process of your lobola negotiations, you would say, because now in modern times we talk about monetary value. Here's our daughter is worth 20,000, but we can only afford 10,000. And you let this wife to be together with. But
even that obviously is problematic, because how can somebody be worth 20,000?
No. Can I finish the first question first and then come to the second one? Now, when that process happens and you agree and they start living together, and then years later we come to say this woman was never really accepted by the family. That is conditional, you know, because it is convenient now. Mm-hmm. You cannot say 8 years later or 9 years later, but we never did this ceremony. So I just wanted to clear that out. Look, unfortunately, if I can say, customary or custom is not stagnant. I'm coming to your question. And we can even talk about living customary law, if we can call it that. In the olden days, we used cows to pay lobola. And today, we use money to pay lobola. But lobola is not saying you're selling off your daughter. It is just a symbol of saying, we are bringing these two families together, and whatever agreement that they have is actually to bring together the families, not to.
So I guess that's why then it doesn't matter whether or not it needs to be completely paid off or not paid off or quarter paid off or whatever the case might be in that instance. But we now have a situation where a court has made this finding. Is this an issue, at least in your experience, that you find that generally women struggle with? You wanted specifically to speak about women in rural areas, and we've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you to keep it short. But is this something that you find that women struggle with?
Nowadays, because I think it used not to be a struggle. It has just become a struggle because there are monies involved. Insurance claims and this and that, where now, because people want to claim, they tend to disown people that they've known for so many years. It's very much unfair to women. And when we look at the rural background, that's where customary marriages are practiced, we feel it is that we strongly feel that and believe that it's very much unfair to women. And for what has happened today, we believe that justice has been done for every woman, especially those in the rural areas, because today they know you as the wife, and they don't say anything, the family, when the husband is still alive. Now, when he cannot answer for himself, they come up with these stories. So we feel that justice has been done not only for Lerato, but for each and every woman, in more particular those that are in rural areas, because that's where we practice mostly customary law.
All right. Well, it certainly does sound like there's, you know, there's so many issues that the specificities of which, you know, need much more clarity when we're talking about a subject like this. Let me thank you for your time. The National House of Traditional Leaders, Inkosikazi, Nondumiso, Nobhongo, Ngonyama, and Kgosatsana, Gaboilelwe, Moroka-Motshabi. Well, coming up after the break, we're going to be speaking to two young people who are changing the South African art scene. Stay with us for that.